As soon as you've done a song, you can actually bounce it and render it down to audio files in different ways. You can either bounce it straight out through the mixer, or you can actually bounce the files, each microphone as its own file.
And that's pre-fader, basically, right?
It's pre-fader, yeah.
Right, so you have the choice of it coming out mixed, essentially how you have your mixer set up, or with it pre-fader, so they're all just equal levels. They're all basically at zero, right?
Yes,
right.
Exactly, yeah. And you can also choose stuff like having the bleed coming with it or not. We're gonna show you different kinds of ways to do it. I have a drum groove here, so let's show that. So that's a short, that's my song. So what I'm doing now, if you can see the mixer here, there are no bleeding activated on any channel. This is just the default, just the, no bleed at all, no ambience mics on except for one ambience mic. I'm gonna go into the bounce window and I'm gonna select some options to show you what you can do with it. So first of all, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit the record button and then I'm gonna play the song. Right. Hit stop. Now it's recorded the MIDI data, so it knows what kind of velocities and MIDI notes and whatever is in here. So now I'm gonna do some options here. So as you can see here, you have all bleed on. That means that when I do this now, let's do it and you'll see what I'm doing. I'll hit bounce and I select a folder. Bounce 1, create that folder and bounce. So what it does now is going through the mixer, taking each mic, and it renders into audio, 24-bit or 16-bit if you wanted to use that.
But it's not reflecting the mixer in Superior.
It's not reflecting the mixer.
So this is all just at zero.
This is at zero.
Right.
So now you can take these, as you can see here, you get all the microphones as WAV files. I'm not sure if you can... Yeah, you can listen to it. So this is the Amp Browner. Even though we didn't have this on when we bounce, so it still renders everything.
Right.
We can listen to the tom mics, even though it wasn't on.
Right.
You have the bleed on it.
Right.
So this way you have the bleed, you have everything, and you can just import this in any DAW and start mixing, right? Like regularly mixing.
But also it's the default bleed levels, right?
Oh yeah.
Because that's not controlled. It's just how the
no,
bleeds
it
default.
depends. If you do changes in the bleed levels, it's gonna reflect in the bouncing. So if I lower the hi-hat, for example, in the bleeding, it's gonna actually be rendered that way.
If you do that, but if you don't, then it'll just do the default bleed.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's it's your choice how you want that to be.
But then there's another way to do this, and that is to split direct from bleeding. So let's do that and see what it does. We'd bounce that to, and we do a new folder called bounce 2. So now I'm splitting the direct signal from bleeding. What does that mean? Do you know?
Yeah, it means that all the room mics are on their own tracks now. So it's separate from the drums completely. So all the bleed are also, or all the bleeds are on their
room.
Yeah, I mean all the bleeds are on individual audio tracks.
So there's a tom track and then a tom bleed track.
Yeah,
a tom
check it out. So
yep, exactly.
Let's do it. So here you have hats close.
Right. Let's make
only hi-hat.
Yeah.
But then you have the hats bleed, only the bleed in the hi-hat mic. So then you can actually control this afterwards, how much bleed you want and everything.
That's wild.
So that's one thing, and the other thing you can do is also to split the microphone. You can do that as long as a microphone has several closed mics in it. So if I go into the mixer and I look at the floor tom, for example, then you can see a small C here on the tom 5, which means that this mic is actually the mic that's closed mic. It's only one in this mic.
Right.
But on the overhead, you have all the cymbals as closed mics. Closed mic.
Right.
So in the bounce, you can select that cymbals that have more than one closed mic in it can be splitted. So I'll do that. I disregard from the split direct from bleeding. I split the microphone and I hit bounce, do a new one, bounce 3. bounce through it, splitting the microphone, the closed mic, which has more than one closed mic in it. So what happens then is that it's gonna give you the option, as you can see here. Then you have all the mics as usual, but you have the overhead as bleed only, no cymbals, and you have the cymbals separated.
Right. And those
So
are
then you
stereo
can
files.
control, yeah. So then you can control all the cymbals afterwards.
Right.
So that's
And again, it's almost like having two different mics where you have, by having just the cymbals isolated in the overheads,
Right.
and then having the drums on their own track through
Right.
the overheads,
Right.
you can EQ and compress them differently.
Right. Sure.
You know, so
Sure.
obviously something you can't do again in the real world.
Right.
That you can do here.
Do you find
know?
yourself doing that a lot?
I've
when you're
definitely
working?
done that
Really?
because I want to compression EQ the cymbals differently than the sound of the
ambience
drums
of
that I'm
drums.
getting through the overheads, which I really like.
Right.
In the Alaire
It's
and
like
the
a tight,
Avatar
roomy
kit,
thing. Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah.
And you put it in that, you know, they sit in the center of the drums, and
Yeah.
you kind of compress them aggressively
Yeah.
and pump a little more mid in them in a rock mix, and suddenly the drums come forward.
Right.
But maintaining the space still.
Right.
and then
So
we
it's a
have
cool
That's
thing to
interesting.
do.
That's really. I didn't know you could do that. That's.
And then we have another way of doing things, and that is to bounce through the mixer. And when you do that, I can choose to have the bleed on or not on. So I'm bouncing through the mixer. That means that I take all the levels that I have, all the EQs, all the compression that I have, all the master. If I have several outputs, it's going to be several stereo tracks in the end. But
And the
if I only
buses, right?
And the buses, everything.
So if you're monitoring with all the inserts on the channels in the mixer, in what case would you not want to bounce with those on? You were saying in this
No,
mode
I think that the reason when you bounce without that's when you don't use the internal effects. That's when you want to have it as you want to render the files and let whoever is going to mix it. If you're going to mix it, you want to use your outboard. You want to use everything. You're not using the
even though
internal.
you've been monitoring through that for the
But
whole
maybe you
session.
haven't been monitoring through the effects. Maybe you're just monitoring right now. We're monitoring default, no effects. This
I
is
see.
just clean.
So you may
Okay.
not want to print your drums with the effects that you're listening
Right.
to. You could just be using them as getting a vibe up for
Right.
overdubbing on and using some compression on the snare, but eventually you may not want
Gotcha.
all that in there. So,
Gotcha. So without having to
also
bypass all those inserts.
Or you may not want all those bleeds separated out, or you may not want the overhead separated out. You may want to just keep it as a traditional stereo file and keep it simple.
Right.
Again, the thing is that you have the options to do it. So,
Right.
So
Right.
you may not want that many drum tracks.
Right.
Because if you actually utilized all the options in there,
Yeah.
plus with
be
the
like
buses,
48 tracks
you
of
could have
drums.
48 tracks
Yeah.
of drums
Yeah.
really easily, like
Yeah.
without any problem. So
That's good.
It is good.
No, I'm just
I
kidding.
mean, but it's again to have that option is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
great, or you can keep it as simple as possible.
Right.
So I'm going to show you bounce through mixer. I put all the bleed on. That means that it does through the mixer, but adding the bleed as well. So
Right.
that's another reason to do that. I mean, you have all the effects and stuff, but you might not have the processing power or the RAM or whatever is necessary to be able to actually print that. Real time. So then you can just print it and try it out.
Right.
So let's do it. Let's bounce through the mixer with all the bleed on. Bounce 4. Because we're listening to it. When we listen to it, we listen without the bleed.
Right.
Because the bleed is not activated
Right.
on any of the channels. And then I activate it and I bounce it. And it renders to a stereo file, probably. To a stereo file here, bounce 4. Out 1, 2. If I had more than one output, I'd choose more masters. I would get each master. So I can actually do toms, separated. I can do
you have a traditional drum
buzzing,
kit, yeah.
like a stem mix
Right.
of the drums.
Right.
So right now you just got the two.
So this is the stereo mix.
Right.
With the bleed turned on and all the room mics. This is different. If you listen to this, that's different from this. This
Level
is
and
cleaner.
sound. Yeah.
Cleaner.
Yeah. Yeah. So when this is bouncing,
Yeah.
rendering these audio files, where is it going to? Just to the desktop in a folder, and you have to drag it into your
Wherever
Pro
you
Tools
want
session?
it. You want it.
Can you do it directly into your Pro Tools session?
Yeah. No.
Time-stamped
What
into
you
the
do,
session,
Look
or-
at this. You do it. What I did. You bounce it
Right.
to a folder
Right.
wherever you choose.
Right.
You take that folder, go in. You take all the files in that folder. You take them. You drag them down to Pro Tools. Just.
as long as you know what bar you started
Right.
from.
That's what I was wondering. I mean,
Yeah,
is
you
it-
just got to, you just
Yeah.
make a note of like I'm starting on bar 1.
Right.
When you put bounce into record, start from your bar 1.
Right.
Record out to bar
Right.
108 or whatever.
Right.
And
Consolidating
then,
audio from 0.
then once it does that, you'll drag them all in and line them up to bar 1. And
Gotcha.
it'll be
So it's a
exactly from your
manual
front to your back.
thing. If you had to redo it later, you'd have to do the same thing again. You have to recreate where you did your bounce from. It's not time stamped in any way. So you
No.
can just, right, okay.